Hello there, friends. I'm joining you today from my backyard, and we'll be sharing an article with you from HBR Selections on dealing with difficult people. Here is the book, slightly stained, but still a good book nonetheless. And this article is entitled Taking the Stress Out of Stressful Conversations. It is written by an author named Holly Weeks. And as always, I will share a little bit about the author first before we jump right into the article. Holly Weeks publishes, teaches, and consults on communications issues. She is an adjunct lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and the author of Failure to Communicate: How Conversations Go Wrong and What You Can Do to Right Them, published in 2008. I imagine that she has more books under her belt by now. So, this article, in this article, Holly will be sharing a few different scenarios and situations, and then we'll share some advice on how to prepare for a stressful conversation and how to manage the conversation as you get into it. So with no further ado, let's begin. Taking the stress out of stressful conversations. We live by talking. That's just the kind of animal that we are. We chatter and tattle and gossip and jest, but sometimes, more often than we'd like, we have stressful conversations. Those sensitive exchanges that can hurt or haunt us in ways no other kind of talking does. Stressful conversations are unavoidable in life, and in business they can run the gamut from firing a subordinate to, curiously enough, receiving praise as well. You may notice this. There are some personalities, some of your colleagues, who even when you are giving them some positive feedback, they want to shy away. They don't like any sort of emotional conversation, even if it's, in their benefit. Continuing. But whatever the context, stressful conversations differ from other conversations because of the emotional loads they carry. These conversations call up embarrassment, confusion, anxiety, anger, pain, or fear. If not in us, then certainly in our counterparts. Indeed, stressful conversations cause such anxiety that most people simply avoid them. This strategy is not necessarily wrong. One of the first rules of engagement, after all, is to pick your battles. Yet, sometimes it can be extremely costly to dodge issues, appease difficult people, and smooth over antagonisms, because the fact is that avoidance usually makes a problem or relationship worse. Since stressful conversations are so common and so painful, why don't we work harder to improve them? The reason is precisely because our feelings are so enmeshed. When we are not emotionally entangled in an issue, we know that conflict is normal, that it can be resolved, or at least managed. But when feelings get stirred up, most of us are thrown off balance. Like a quarterback who chokes in a tight play, we lose all hope of ever making it to the goal line. For the past 20 years, I have been teaching classes and conducting workshops at some of the top corporations and universities in the United States on how to communicate during stressful conversations. With classrooms as my laboratory, I have learned that most people feel incapable of talking through sensitive issues. It's as though all of our skills go out the window and we can't think usefully about what's happening or what we could do to get good results. Stressful conversations, though, need not be this way. I have seen that managers can improve difficult conversations unilaterally if they approach them with greater self-awareness, rehearse them in advance, and apply just 3 proven communication techniques. Now, don't misunderstand me. There will never be a cookie cutter approach to stressful conversations. There are simply too many variables, too much tension, and the interactions between people in difficult situations are always unique. You have to play them by ear, and of course, it helps when you have developed a relationship with these people and you can indeed understand how they work, how they think, what motivates them, etc. Continuing, yet nearly every stressful conversation can be seen as an amalgam of a limited number of basic conversations, each with its own distinct set of problems. In the following pages, we'll explore how you can anticipate and handle those problems. But first, let's look at the 3 basic stressful conversations that we bump up against most often in the workplace. Number 1, I have bad news for you. Delivering unpleasant news is usually difficult for both parties. The speaker is often tense, and the listener is apprehensive about where the conversation is headed. Consider David, the director of a non-profit organization. He was in the uncomfortable position of needing to talk with an ambitious researcher, Jeremy, who had a much higher opinion of his own job performance than others in the organization did. The complication for David was that in the past, Jeremy had received artificially high evaluations. There were several reasons for this. One had to do with the organization's culture. The nonprofit was not a confrontational kind of place. Additionally, Jeremy had tremendous confidence in both his own abilities and the quality of his academic background. Together with his defensive response to even the mildest criticisms, this confidence led others, including David, including his own manager, to let slide discussions of weaknesses that were interfering with Jeremy's ability to deliver high-quality work. Jeremy also had a cutting sense of humor. Not cutting edge as in, it's extremely innovative and revolutionary sort of sense of humor. No, it's one that caused tension in the workplace. For instance, and this had offended people inside and outside of his own unit. Now, no one had ever said anything to him directly, but as time passed, more and more people were reluctant to work with him. Given that Jeremy had received almost no concrete criticism over the years, his biting style was now entrenched, and the staff was restive. In conversations like this, the main challenge is to get off to the right start. If the exchange starts off reasonably well, the rest of it has a good chance of going well as well. But if the opening goes badly, it threatens to bleed forward into the rest of the conversation. In an effort to be gentle, many people start these conversations on a light note. And that was just what David did. Opening with, so how about those Red Sox? Right? Naturally, Jeremy got the wrong idea about where David was headed. Right? David made this error. He made a mistake in starting off with a light note like that because Jeremy does not understand what this conversation is supposed to be about and how he's supposed to react. So, Jeremy got the wrong idea about where the conversation was heading, and he remained his usual cocky, superior self. Now, sensing this, David felt he had to take off the velvet gloves. The conversation quickly became brutally honest, and David did almost all of the talking. Right? So it was a monologue. There's no conversation happening there. When the monologue was over, Jeremy stared icily at the floor. He got up in stiff silence and left. And David was relieved. From his point of view, the interaction had been painful but swift. Ripped the band-aid off. There was not too much blood on the floor, he observed wryly. But 2 days later, Jeremy handed in his resignation, taking a lot of institutional memory with him and talent. That was the first scenario. Second one, what's going on here? Often we have stressful conversations thrust upon us. Indeed, some of the worst conversations, especially for people who are conflict averse, are the altogether unexpected ones that break out like crackling summer storms. Suddenly, the conversation becomes intensely charged emotionally, and electricity flies in all directions. What's worse, nothing makes sense. We seem to have been drawn into a black cloud of twisted logic and altered sensibilities. Consider the case of Elizabeth and Raphael. They were both team leaders working together on a project for a major consulting firm. It seemed that everything that could have gone wrong on the project had, and the work was badly bogged down. The two consultants were meeting to revise their schedule given the delays and to divide up the discouraging tasks for the week ahead. As they talked, Elizabeth wrote and erased on the whiteboard. After she had finished, she looked at Raphael and said matter-of-factly, "Is that it then?" Raphael clenched his teeth in frustration. "If you say so," he sniped. Elizabeth recoiled. She instantly replayed the exchange in her mind, but couldn't figure out what had provoked Raphael. His reaction seemed completely disconnected from her comment. The most common reaction of someone in Elizabeth's place is to guiltily defend herself by denying Raphael's unspoken accusation. But Elizabeth was uneasy with confrontation, so she tried appeasement. Raphael, she stammered. I'm sorry, is something wrong?" "Who put you in charge?" he retorted. "Who told you to assign work to me?" Clearly, Raphael and Elizabeth have just happened into a difficult conversation. Some transgression has occurred, but Elizabeth doesn't know exactly what it is. She feels blindsided. Her attempt to expedite the task at hand has clearly been misconstrued. Raphael feels he's being put in a position of inferiority by what he sees as Elizabeth's controlling behavior. Inexplicably, there seem to be more than two people taking part in this conversation, and invisible parties are creating lots of static. What childhood experience, we may wonder, is causing Elizabeth to assume that Raphael's tension is automatically her fault? And who is influencing Raphael's perception that Elizabeth is taking over? Could it be his father, his wife? It's impossible to tell. At the same time, it's hard for us to escape the feeling that Raphael is overreacting when he challenges Elizabeth about her alleged need to just take control. So, Elizabeth felt Raphael's resentment like a wave, and she apologized again. "Sorry, how do you want the work divided?" Deferring to Raphael in this way smoothed the strained atmosphere for the time being. But it set a precedent for unequal status that neither Elizabeth nor the company believed was correct. Worse, though Raphael and Elizabeth remained on the same team after this painful exchange, Elizabeth chafed under the status change and 3 months later transferred out of the project. Now the third situation that HollyWeeks provides in this article. You are attacking me. Now, let's turn our attention to aggressively stressful conversations, those in which people use all kinds of psychological and rhetorical mechanisms to throw their counterparts off balance, to undermine their positions, even to expose and belittle them. These thwarting tactics, as she calls them, take many forms. Profanity, swearing at people, manipulation, shouting, being physically aggressive, and not everyone is triggered or stumped by the same ones. The red zone is not the thwarting tactic alone, but the pairing of the thwarting tactic with individual vulnerability. Consider Nick and Karen, two senior managers working at the same level at an IT firm. Karen was leading a presentation to a client, and the information was weak and disorganized. She and the team had not been able to answer even basic questions. The client had been patient, then quiet, then clearly exasperated. When the presentation really started to fall apart, the client put the team on the spot with questions that made them look increasingly inadequate. Now, on this particular day, Nick was not part of the presenting team. He was simply observing. He was as surprised as the client at Karen's poor performance. After the client left, he asked Karen what happened, and she lashed out at him defensively. "You're not my boss, so don't start patronizing me. You always undercut me no matter what I do." Karen continued to shout at Nick, her antagonism palpable. Each time he spoke, she interrupted him with accusations and threats. "I can't wait to see how you like it when people see you flailing in the wind." Nick tried to remain reasonable, but Karen didn't wind down. "Karen," he said, "pull yourself together. You are twisting every word I say." Here, Nick's problem is not that Karen is using a variety of thwarting tactics, but that all her tactics, accusation, distortion, and digression, are aggressive. This raises the stakes considerably. Most of us are vulnerable to aggressive tactics because we don't know whether or how far the aggression will escalate. Nick wanted to avoid Karen's aggression, but his insistence on rationality in the face of emotionalism was not working. His cool approach was trumped by Karen's aggressive one. As a result, Nick found himself trapped in the snare of Karen's choosing. In particular, her threats that she would pay him back with the client rattled him. He couldn't tell whether she was just huffing or meant it. He finally turned to the managing director, who grew frustrated and later angry at Nick and Karen for their inability to resolve their problems. Keep in mind, Nick and Karen in this situation are both at the senior level. They are senior managers. So their higher-ups are now getting frustrated with them because at that level, they're still unable to resolve these sorts of differences and personality issues. In the end, their lack of skill in handling their difficult conversation cost them dearly. Both were passed over for promotion after the company pinned the loss of the client directly on their persistent failure to communicate. So, those are the three situations. Now, Holly will take us through a couple of items regarding preparing for a stressful conversation and then managing the stressful conversations when you're right in the thick of it. So, this next section, preparing for a stressful conversation. So, how can we prepare for these three basic stressful conversations before they occur? A good start is to become aware of your own weaknesses to people and situations. David, Elizabeth, and Nick were unable to control their counterparts, but their stressful conversations would have gone much better if they had been more usefully aware of their own vulnerabilities. It is important for those who are vulnerable to hostility, for example, to know how they react to it. Do they withdraw? Do they escalate? Do they clam up or do they retaliate? While one reaction is not better than the other, knowing how you react in a stressful situation will teach you a lot about your own vulnerabilities, and it can help you master stressful situations. Recall Nick's problem. If he had been more self aware, he would have known that he acts stubbornly rational in the face of aggressive outbursts, such as Karen's. Nick's choice of disengaged demeanor gave Karen control over the conversation. But he didn't have to allow Karen or anyone else to exploit his vulnerability. In moments of calm self scrutiny, when he's not entangled in a live, stressful conversation, Nick can take time to reflect on his inability to tolerate irrational, aggressive outbursts. This self awareness would free him up to prepare himself, not for Karen's unexpected accusations, but for his own predictable vulnerability to any sudden assault like hers. So that is the key. Know your vulnerability, especially in situations where it's going to be thrust upon you. You don't have control over this conversation, but you should have self-awareness to know what's happening within you and how you're responding. Continuing. Though it might sound like it, building awareness is not about endless self-analysis. Much of it simply involves making our tacit knowledge about ourselves more explicit. We all know from past experience, for instance, what kinds of conversations and people we handle badly. When you find yourself in a difficult conversation, ask yourself whether this is one of those situations and whether it involves one of those people. For instance, do you bare your teeth when faced with an overbearing competitor? Do you shut down when you feel excluded? Once you know what your danger zones are, you can anticipate your vulnerability and improve your response. Explicit self-awareness will often help save you from engaging in a conversation in a way that panders to your feelings rather than the one that serves your needs. Think back to David, the boss of the non-profit organization, and Jeremy, his cocky subordinate. Given Jeremy's history, David's conversational game plan, easing in, then, when that didn't work, the painful but quick bombshell, was doomed. It was never going to work from the start. A better approach would have been for David to split the conversation into two parts. In a first meeting, he could have raised the central issues of Jeremy's biting humor and disappointing performance. A second meeting now could have been set up for the discussion itself. Handling the situation incrementally would have allowed time for both David and Jeremy to prepare for a two-way conversation instead of one of them delivering a monologue. After all, this wasn't an emergency. David didn't have to exhaust this topic immediately. Indeed, if David had been more self-aware, he might have recognized that the approach he chose was dictated less by Jeremy's character than his own distaste for conflict. An excellent way to anticipate specific problems that you may encounter in a stressful conversation is to rehearse it with a neutral friend. Pick someone who doesn't have the same communication problems as you. Ideally, the friend should be a good listener, honest, but non-judgmental. Start with the content. Just tell your friend what you want to say to your counterpart without worrying about the tone or worrying about the phrasing. Just focus on the content. These are the specific ideas, these are the specific pieces of information that Jeremy needs to take from this conversation. Be vicious, be timid, be sarcastically witty, jump around in your argument, but get it out. Make sure everything comes out, and then you can begin your brainstorming. Now, go over it again and think about what you would say if the situation weren't emotionally loaded. Your friend, the person that you are having this neutral dialogue with, can help you because he or she is not in a flush of emotion over the situation. Write down what you come up with together, because if you don't, you will forget it later. And if you are the type of person who has a lot of thoughts running through their mind, all of a sudden the floodgates will open and all sorts of ideas and sentences and new conversations will start getting created in your mind. So grab a pen and a paper and write down some of your notes and how you want to say this. Now, next step, fine-tune the phrasing. When you imagine talking to the counterpart, your phrasing tends to be highly charged. And you can think of only one way to say anything. But when your friend says, "Tell me how you want to say this," an interesting thing happens. Right? Tell me how you want to say this. Your phrasing is often much better, much more temperate, much more usable. Remember, you can say what you want to say. You just can't say it like that. So also work on your body language with your friend. You'll both soon be laughing because of the expressions that sneak out unawares. Eyebrows skittering up and down, legs wrapped around each other like licorice twists, nervous snickers that will certainly be misinterpreted, right? That's another thing. Some people, when they get into a stressful conversation, they will start laughing, and that so often gets misinterpreted when both people are emotionally charged. So be aware that you have certain nervous tics, let's say, even though that's not the correct terminology. Okay, so there's a little sidebar here which I will skip because I would like to get straight into the next section that Holly provides, which is managing the conversation. So, while it is important to build awareness and to practice before a stressful conversation, and it is very important, make sure you do this. It'll only get better with practice. So while the practice is important, those steps are not enough. Let's look at what you can do as the conversation unfolds. Consider Elizabeth, the team leader whose colleague claimed that she was usurping control. She couldn't think well on her feet in confrontational situations, and she knew it. So she needed a few hip pocket phrases that she could recall on the spot so she wouldn't have to be silent or invent something in the spur of the moment. Though such a solution sounds simple, most of us don't have a toolkit of conversational tactics ready at hand. Rectifying this gap is an essential part of learning how to handle stressful conversations better. We need to learn communication skills in the same way we learn CPR, well in advance, knowing that when we need to use them, the situation will be critical and tense. So here are 3 proven conversational approaches. The particular wording may not suit your style, and that's fine. The important thing is to understand how the techniques work and then choose phrasing that's comfortable for you. So the first one is entitled Honor Thy Partner. When David gave negative feedback to Jeremy, it would have been refreshing if he had begun with an admission of regret and some responsibility for his contribution to their shared problem. Jeremy, he might have said, the quality of your work has been undercut, in part by the reluctance of your colleagues to risk the edge of your humor by talking problems through with you. I share responsibility for this because I have been reluctant to speak openly about these difficulties with you, whom I like and respect, and with whom I have worked for a long time. Acknowledging responsibility as a technique, particularly as an opening statement, can be effective because it immediately focuses attention, but without provocation, on the difficult things the speaker needs to say and the listener needs to hear. It is always a good technique in a difficult conversation. Now, is this always a good technique in a difficult conversation? No, because there is never any one good technique. But in this case, it effectively sets the tone for David's discussion with Jeremy. It honors the problems, it honors Jeremy, it honors the relationship, and it honors David's responsibility. Any technique that communicates honor in stressful conversation, particularly a conversation that will take the counterpart by surprise, is to be highly valued. Indeed, the ability to act with dignity can make or break a stressful conversation. More importantly, while Jeremy has left the company, he can still do harm by spreading gossip and using his insider knowledge against the organization. The more intolerable the conversation with David has been, the more Jeremy is likely to want to make the organization pay. So that is the first piece of advice shared by Holly. Honor thy partner. Number 2, disarm by restating your intentions. Part of the difficulty in Raphael and Elizabeth's "what's going on here" conversation is that Raphael's misinterpretation of Elizabeth's words and actions seems to be influenced by instant replays of other stressful conversations that he has had in the past. Elizabeth doesn't want to psychoanalyze Raphael. Indeed, exploring Raphael's internal landscape would exacerbate this painful situation. So, what can Elizabeth do to diffuse this situation unilaterally? Elizabeth needs a technique that doesn't require her to understand the underlying reasons for Raphael's strong reaction, but that helps her handle the situation effectively. I can see how you took what I said the way you did, Raphael. That wasn't what I meant. Let's go over this list again. I call this the clarification technique, and it's a highly disarming one. Using it, Elizabeth can unilaterally change the confrontation to a point of agreement. Instead of arguing with Raphael about his perceptions, she grants him his perceptions. Right? They're your perceptions. I understand that. I didn't mean that. Let's clarify what needs to happen here. After all, these perceptions, they are his. She's not creating it. The perceptions are coming from his end. Instead of arguing about her intentions, she keeps the responsibility for aligning her words with her intentions, and she goes back into the conversation right where they left off. Right? Now there's another sidebar that goes into the gap between communication and intent. If you want to read the two sidebars that I've skipped over, make sure you get this book, Dealing with Difficult People. I'll skip past it and continue the article. This technique will work for Elizabeth, regardless of Raphael's motive. If Raphael innocently misunderstood what she was saying, she isn't fighting him. She accepts his take on what she said and did and corrects it. If his motive is hostile, Elizabeth doesn't concur just to appease him. She accepts and retries. No one loses face, no one scores points off the other, no one gets drawn off onto a tangent. So that is the second idea, to try and disarm them with clarifications. Now, the third tactic is fight tactics, not people. Raphael may have baffled Elizabeth, but Karen was acting with outright malice towards Nick when she flew off the handle after that disastrous meeting with the client. Nick certainly can't prevent her from using the thwarting tactics with which she has become so successful in the past. Successful in air quotes here. But he can separate Karen's character from her behavior. For instance, it's much more useful for him to think of Karen's reactions as thwarting tactics rather than as personal characteristics. If he thinks of Karen as a distorting, hostile, threatening person, then where does that really lead? It doesn't really benefit him to think of her in this way. What can anyone ever do about another person's character? But if Nick sees Karen's behavior as a series of tactics that she is using with him because they have worked for her in the past, he can think about using countering techniques to neutralize them. The best way to neutralize a tactic is to name it. It's much harder to use a tactic once it is openly identified.